Welcome back to the Budget Gamer channel, where we bring you critical and in-depth reviews of just about every indie game we can get our hands on, and today we're actually going to be taking a look back at the entire year of 2020 gaming here at the BGC. And though it was incredibly difficult to go through over 100 games that I've played and reviewed over the last year alone, I did manage to put together a list of about 15 or 16 titles that I considered to be, above all must-haves. But since asking a gamer to pick their favorite game is like asking a parent to pick their favorite child, I think the only really justifiable way to do it is just to start at the start and work to the end. And so this list is going to be arranged by chronology, not by genre or, the absolute must-have comes last. And so starting off at the very beginning of 2020, I played a game called 1980X. And this game was fundamentally phenomenal for so many reasons, one of them being that it really resonates for anyone who was growing up in the angsty 80s and 90s and was trying to deal with their own coming of age through gaming specifically as an outlet. It is a pretty heartfelt game that has the gamer playing through things like classic arcade-style racing games and shoot-'em-ups, just like would have been available in a classic arcade in the late 80s and early 90s. And so if you're looking for a quick trip down memory lane as a gamer, 1980X might have a lot of gaming and a lot of emotion that you wouldn't have expected. Moving down the list though, Goblin Sword is on the top of several of my lists because it's not only a really cool and really involved action-adventure game, it's one that offers dozens of hours of gameplay, multiple endings, and can be played fairly enjoyably as a casual action platformer. And so with awesome visual aesthetics, micro levels, unlockable weapons, armor, and runes to help modify and customize your gameplay, as well as some pretty cool boss fights, Goblin Sword is totally a must-have for anyone who's a fan of action gaming and might need it in a more casual setting. Grizzland, though, does fall slightly in the category of action platformer, but much more heavily in the genre of Metroid-Vania, and somehow it brings across an incredible gaming experience with really innovative power-ups and level design, and even a few hidden game mechanics that you're probably not even going to realize exist unless you accidentally stumble onto them. And seeing all of this game innovation offered in pretty much 8-bit monochromatic black and white visuals, I was yet again stunned by the innovation of indie developers in Grizzland. But as this is kind of a long list of games, I'm going to try and keep up the pace and move on to our next action platformer, Dogurai. In Dogurai, the motivations are simple. One of your buddies got captured, it's your job to get him back. But actually playing through Dogurai is like winning one of those Nickelodeon Toys R Us shopping sprees at One Touch Death R Us. It is so fast and so fun, and you'll die all the time, but you just can't stop. And whenever you find one of those games that you're constantly just brutally penalized for even the slightest fail and you just have to keep playing, I mean that's kind of the hallmark of a must-have game. But if you are not a fan of brutally technical platformers, this one might be a little difficult. But continuing the theme of fast-paced and potentially brutally difficult, we'll move on to Null Drifter. Null Drifter, like Grizzland, is pretty fundamental, at least as far as its visuals are concerned. And thankfully, even though I'm not really a super huge fan of the shoot-'em-up style games, the controls are also so simple and so precise that with its constantly evolving enemy platforms, constantly upgrading weapons and abilities, and randomized boss fights, Null Drifter was fast and furious, and I really couldn't stop playing. It's probably one of the most fun, simplistic arcade-style shoot-'em-ups that I think I've ever played. And that combined with its price tag definitely makes it a must-have game. But not to stray too far from the genre, and moving down the list, is 2064 Read-Only Memories. And personally, I absolutely adored the visual aesthetics of this game, and the soundtrack was pretty awesome too. But even though it looks like what would be a fairly typical visual novel-style detective game, there's a lot of extra bits and puzzling and a lot of reliance on your player's logic to find out what happened to the mysteriously vanished creator of, to date, the world's most advanced AI. And it is this little morsel of a motivation that's going to carry you through some pretty unbelievable situations and create a pretty long-lasting impact for this little indie. Moving on though, and keeping in the vein of technology, is Cyber Protocol. And if you did read the eShop's description for Cyber Protocol, it seems like it would be some sort of open RPG or maybe an adventure game, but I mean, far from it. It is a straight puzzler. But as it could probably only be described as a blending of Blade Runner and Pac-Man, it's a pretty awesome puzzle game. It is super fast-paced, it constantly has a linear progression in its difficulty curve, and the blinding neon graphics keep it so firmly locked into that 80s dystopian theme. But while the gameplay itself might be awesome, the soundtrack is pretty darn epic. So if you are a fast-paced puzzle game fan, definitely a must-have. Moving further down the list is the Eternal Castle Remastered. And while suitably retro and a little bit on that tech theme, this is actually one of those cinematic platformers, kind of like The Way Remastered. And so while it's not super based in action, every single one of the situations that you get into will have you making some sort of technical decision and challenging your own skills to make it through. The general premise, though, is that you and your co-pilot got shot down and you'll have to recollect 5 different artifacts to save your co-pilot and get your butts back to space. And as simple as that sounds, this game not only offers a beautiful experience, that is pretty challenging as well. Next up though, and still in the story vein, is the Warlock of Firetop Mountain. And one of the coolest things about this game is not only is it brilliantly done with the retro appeal of tabletop gaming, every single one of the game's 20 plus unlockable characters has their own backgrounds, which means not only do they play in unique ways, it's almost like you have 20 plus choose your own adventure stories to play through, because every single character will have their own mission even though you're playing through what's essentially the same mountain scenario. And not only that, it's not just a choose your own adventure or a tabletop style gaming, it actually has some real-time strategy combat. But diving way off the established path so far, if you're a slash and dash gamer who just likes to drive without your seatbelt because you think it's fun, then Ubermosh Black is a game for you. Violence, gore, amazing driving metal soundtrack, and pretty much nothing else to do except kill as many enemies as humanly possible with an ever-increasing difficulty curve. And so if you haven't heard of it yet, Ubermosh. Specifically Ubermosh Black, because there's like 100 Ubermosh games out there. And getting back to the uber soulful story style games is She Remembered Caterpillars. And if you've already seen my review of She Remembered Caterpillars, you know how taken aback I was by the visuals. It's a really clever puzzle game that's really beautifully orchestrated. But not only that, the deeper you manage to burrow into this challenging puzzler, the more of a really poignant story you're exposed to. And this is one that I've had my fingers crossed for a while to get a physical release because honestly I just like it that much. But divorcing ourselves from the feels for a minute is actually Endurance Space Shooter, which I know a lot of people don't really like the roguelike room-to-room clear games, but this one is done so clever and so well that I really kind of fell in love with it. And in the beginning of the game, you pretty much start off with nothing, no weapons, and really no idea of what's going on, except that 3 days from now, everyone on your entire ship is left in a giant bloody pool. And so you'll have to arm yourself and figure out what the heck's going on in a roguelike campaign to hopefully stop the inevitable carnage. And yes, there are mobs to fight and guns to collect and bosses to battle, but there's also 3 different modes of combat, and if you want to find out more about it, you can go ahead and check out the review. Moving on though to some of our more recent games is Cthulhu Saves Christmas. I mean, it is actually Christmas, so if you haven't heard of this game, might want to go download it and play it, because 'tis the season. But basically, Cthulhu Saves Christmas is a prequel to Cthulhu Saves the World, where you play as the incredibly irreverent and satirical Cthulhu who tries to save Santa in order to get as his benevolent Christmas gift his powers back to inevitably destroy the world. And as you can probably imagine from a game with a plot like that, it does not take itself seriously at all and is probably one of the most hilarious JRPG style games I've ever played. But moving ever further down the list is one of the most intense and intensely beautiful puzzlers I think I've ever played, and that is Filament. Filament, just came out. And it basically puts you on a spaceship where, as a character trying to help a pilot locked in their cockpit, you have to go through the ship's systems and see if you can unlock them all manually, using basically a little light bulb on a tether. And so with an ingenious system of almost weaving or knot tying, you'll have to touch that filament to certain pylons and not others, light up certain colors, make certain numbers of connections, and do a whole mess of really crazy mind-bending stuff, all to achieve this almost feeling like open world adventure style puzzle game. There's exploration, there's a story, there's voiceovers, there's things to collect. And if you get into the computer systems, there's massive backstories for each of the game's characters. And so while I hate to hurry through the description, really well done. And bringing us to our 15th game on the list is Ord. I know Ord isn't for everybody, but it is so bleeding clever. Basically, you're given a one-word prompt and 2 words that you can choose between, and based on your decision, it makes a 3-word page to push you just 1 inch further into the story. And while this may sound terribly boring, one of the things I discovered about its black and white visuals is that the less text it offers, the more your imagination just goes flippin' crazy. And not only does Ord give you this experience, it gives you this experience in about 5 different ways with a handful of different stories, whether that be trying to defeat the Warlock in the tower, or making your way through some interdimensional situation, or staging or stopping a train robbery. But no matter what the situation or how far you make it into the game, you'll pretty much have to make all your decisions based on just 3 words. And last, but certainly not least, and a huge contender for probably my favorite game that I've played in all of 2020, is Tanuki Justice, and I'm sure if you saw the review, you knew this was coming. Tanuki Justice is one of those actually retro, perfectly done arcade-style action platformers. You can play in 1 or 2 players like Super Ninja Boy, you can challenge bosses, you can try and speedrun it, and with the incredibly short level design, it makes even that devastatingly difficult challenge that you find in every single inch of the game totally fair. And while I don't generally enjoy games that rely heavily on the player just memorizing what's coming up next in the level, that really is how a lot of classic action platformers were, and if I didn't know better, other than the crisp visuals and amazing audio soundtrack, just for the gameplay style, I really would have thought that this was an actual classic arcade game and not a modern game. And so if you are a fan of classic arcade style action platformers, Tanuki Justice is an absolute must-have. But anyway, that does wrap up the wrap-up of 2020 and the top 15 or 16 favorite games that I've played and reviewed here on the channel in the entire year. And so if any of these were new for you, I highly advise you to check out the actual full review, which you can find in any of our playlists or just search it on the channel. And finally, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for your support throughout this year, whether you're one of our original subs from about 2.5 years ago when the channel started, or maybe you just found us today on this video. But anyway, I'd like to wish you all a happy holidays. I'd like to wish a real big old goodbye to 2020. And let's hope for some amazing growth and some amazing games in 2021. But anyway, this has been The Budget Gamer, so as always, thanks for watching.